Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us here on CBS News 24/7. I'm Ben Tracy.
And I'm Lilia Luciano. Testimony continued today in the hush money criminal trial involving former President Donald Trump. The court heard testimony from witness David Pecker, who's the former publisher of the National Enquirer. Pecker detailed meetings with Trump and his then attorney Michael Cohen, saying he would be Trump's, quote, eyes and ears on any negative stories surrounding Trump during the 2016 cycle.
CBS News national correspondent Errol Barnett is following the trial for us from outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Errol, I found this testimony really fascinating so far today, really kind of describing this symbiotic relationship between Donald Trump and the National Enquirer and their kind of mutual interests. What has stood out to you?
Ben and Lilia, you're exactly right. There were two key components to today's development in this criminal case in the courthouse, and that is the testimony from David Pecker, the publisher of the National Enquirer, who spoke about a close kinship and friendship with Donald Trump that dates back to the late 80s. And there were also discussions this morning about what to do, what decision Judge Juan Merchan may make in punishing Donald Trump for what the prosecution says are some 10 violations of the gag order implemented against him. But let's dig deeper into that testimony from David Pecker. CBS reporter Graham Cates is here with me. You've been inside the courthouse. You've been seeing the president's mannerisms, his mood. But today the jury got to hear a close friend of his speak about why and how interested Donald Trump was in his public image and how David Pecker helped craft that. What did the jury learn?
Just now, Pecker testified about this first instance of what we've come to know as a catch and kill scheme. That is where his publication and he himself sought out stories that he thought would be embarrassing to Trump or the Trump campaign during the 2016 presidential election. And he described the first instance of this when a doorman from Trump Tower spread the word that he was looking to sell a story that actually Pecker and his publication ultimately concluded wasn't true. And what the doorman was trying to sell was a story about an illegitimate child that he said Trump had with a maid at Trump Tower. And even though they concluded the story wasn't true, he said that they purchased the rights to the story for some $30,000. And what's really interesting about that is he also said that the most they would really ever pay for a story or a source for a story was $10,000, but that it was so important to lock up this story. That's how he described it, locking it up so that it wouldn't be on the market, so that it wouldn't be out there potentially embarrassing for Trump, that he was willing to go way above the amount that he normally paid for a story that he thought might actually be true. And he said he had two approaches to this. The first was, if they realized it was true, he thought that a story like that in the presidential campaign would be as big for the National Enquirer as when Elvis Presley died. But he never really wanted to publish it anyway. He wanted to, at the very least, wait until after the election so that it wouldn't be out there to hurt Trump during the election.
What's fascinating about that level of detail, because I understand he also testified about purposefully publishing in the National Enquirer negative stories about Donald Trump's Republican opponents at the time, including Senators Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, is that it seems to suggest to the jury that there was a concerted effort to manage the public image. We understand that Donald Trump now, as he's exiting the courthouse, is addressing cameras. If we can pump up the audio, we can hear what he's saying at this moment.
I'm not allowed to talk, but people are allowed to talk about me. So they can talk about me, they can say whatever they want, they can lie, but I'm not allowed to say anything. I just have to sit back and look at why a conflicted judge has ordered me to have a gag order. I don't think anybody's ever seen anything like this. I'd love to talk to you people. I'd love to say everything that's on my mind, but I'm restricted because I have a gag order. And I'm not sure that anybody's ever seen anything like this before. And even having to do with articles. Somebody writes an article. If I read every one of these articles incomplete, I read some of it and I'll look at headlines, all good headlines, and the case is a sham. But I can't read the whole thing. I'd be reading, this is like reading a novel. So I put an article in, and then somebody's name is mentioned somewhere deep in the article, and I end up in violation of a gag order. I think it's a disgrace. It's totally unconstitutional. I don't believe it's never, not to this extent, ever happened before. I'm not allowed to defend myself, and yet other people are allowed to say whatever they want about me. Very, very unfair. Having to do with the schools and the closings, that's Biden's fault. And by the way, this trial is all Biden. You know, this is all Biden, just in case anybody has any question. And they're keeping me in a courtroom that's freezing, by the way, in a courtroom all day long. Well, he's out campaigning. That's probably an advantage because he can't campaign. Nobody knows what he's doing. He can't put two sentences together. But he's out campaigning. He's out campaigning, and I'm here in a courtroom, sitting here, sitting up as straight as I can all day long, because you know what? It's a very unfair situation. So we're locked up in a courtroom, and this guy's out there campaigning, if you call it a campaign. Every time he opens his mouth, he gets himself into trouble. So that's the story. I have an unconstitutional gag order by a highly conflicted judge that should recuse himself. Very simple. On the schools, should have never happened. What's going on in this country now should have never happened. But of course, the Ukraine war would have never happened. The Israeli attack would have never happened. Inflation would have never happened. We have the worst president in the history of our country, and he's the one that has us in all these different lawsuits. Thank you very much.
So you've been listening to the former president there down outside the courtroom as court wraps up for the day, saying some of the things that we hear him say almost every day that he comes out of the court, talking about that gag order.
Yeah, that the gag order is working because there have been expressions on social media, et cetera, and he's kind of explaining how the gag order works. One thing that, we keep hearing about is campaigning in the court, not in the courtroom, but perhaps at the courthouse. And this is what we're seeing over and over. He can't go to campaign events during the week because he has to be in court, but he's basically sending the message that he would at a campaign rally standing out there.
His only day off is Wednesday when court is out of session, and then on the weekends, and he's trying to hold campaign rallies. So, yeah, it is interesting. We should clear one thing. He did say that this court case is all Biden. This court case is a case in New York that has nothing to do with the federal government, just to clear that up. All right, let's go to CBS News national correspondent Errol Barnett, who is following the trial for us from outside the courthouse in Manhattan.
Hey there, Ben and Lilia. So Graham and I watched Donald Trump there as he's exiting the courthouse effectively complain that he can't speak as freely as he wants because the judge is deciding, not only is there already a gag order, but the judge still has to decide what the punishments may be for what the prosecution says are violations of that gag order. What we saw the president hold papers and suggest that he's limited in what he can say. Where is that decision with the judge right now?
We're still waiting for that decision. And the gag order is not going to be lifted no matter what. And Trump won't be allowed to just talk about witnesses in the case. And Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels, two of the people he frequently targets, yes, they're witnesses in the case. Yes, they speak publicly, but they're not the ones who are facing criminal charges. He is, and that's why he's the one who's restricted. And it's not actually something that's that unusual. Typically, in a criminal case, the defendant can't go around talking about all of the witnesses, posting about them online. The only thing that really makes this one unusual is the fact that he is also running for president.
The one thing we didn't hear Donald Trump say as he left the courthouse was that the testimony laid out by David Pecker was inaccurate. He didn't deny a lot of what Pecker said as far as paying for stories that were potentially damaging to him in the 2016 election to be hidden, or that they paid or amplified stories against his opponents as well. What kind of impact do you think that may have on the jury, which is by now only heard from David Pecker?
Yeah, well, so Pecker's actually kind of laying the groundwork for what they haven't even gotten to is the actual charges in the case.
Right.
He's explaining how this process worked, how they worked to get all of these stories that were negative about Trump, with the kind of the final one that they're going to talk about is the $130,000 payment that was made by Michael Cohen, not David Pecker, to Stormy Daniels, so that the jury understands Trump's involvement, if there was any, Michael Cohen's involvement, involvement, which he's acknowledged before, in this process of fishing out these stories and suppressing them.
Now, Pecker seems believable to the jury, possibly because he was still complimenting Trump from the stand, saying he was one of the most eligible bachelors. He always had the most attractive partners and wives. Michael Cohen, on the other hand, who was expected to be a star witness in this trial, who was already pleaded guilty to his role, may pose more credibility problems for the prosecution, considering that Trump's defense is aiming to poke holes in the story that he will eventually lay out. Why is that?
Cohen's the key witness against Trump, and the defense has already explained they're going to attack him in his credibility in two different ways. The first is he's already gone to prison. He's gone to federal prison on charges somewhat related to this one. He's acknowledged committing perjury before. He's acknowledged lying to Congress before. And they're also going to attack the way he currently makes money. His income right now is a podcast where he talks about Trump a lot. He's written books about his experience with Trump. They're going to talk about that. One of them was called Revenge. They're going to talk about what they say is his motivation to testify against Trump, to try to get Trump in trouble. And the prosecutors are going to try to buttress Cohen and explain that he's providing documents to them. They're going to try to support his testimony. And we'll have to see who kind of makes the better case on this, whether the jury finds Cohen credible.
And so these are some of the standout witnesses we expect to be in front of the jury. But we could also, down the line, hear from Stormy Daniels, Stephanie Clifford, the pornographic actress herself, perhaps Karen McDougal, a Playboy model who had also alleged an affair, but that story allegedly was paid to be suppressed. What impact could their testimony have?
Well, they're there to kind of back up what Pecker is saying right now. Pecker is describing this process, and Cohen's going to describe this process, and they're going to say, we had these stories about sexual encounters with Trump. We were telling the truth, which Trump denies. He denies both women's claims on that, and we specifically sought out payment for these stories. They're going to tell about how they wanted a publication, whether it was the National Enquirer or someone else, to pay for the stories.
So tomorrow, courtroom is dark. Things resume Thursday with perhaps Pecker's continued testimony and other witnesses as well. The defense will have an opportunity to cross-examine, of course, and so there are many more aspects and twists and turns to come, Ben and Lilia, and of course we will be here bringing you every update as it emerges.
A lot of interesting testimony to come. Thank you, Errol, and thank you, Graham.
Thank you. Got it.